thank you that you are the source of all truth. And as your thoughts are higher than our thoughts, we need your Holy Spirit to be with us for this discussion. We don't want to just debate to be argumentative. We want to share our thoughts and our perspectives so that we can understand better what the truth is and help each other develop critical thinking skills and come to weigh issues that are controversial for ourselves. Even though we want to do it for ourselves, we want to do it with your help. So I ask for you to be with us today. Help us to listen to each other. Help us to think deeply. And please guide our thoughts and our words. Pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so Samuel Atwood.
That's my name. So, I'm gonna just speak for myself. Like, I think that having images is nice because I feel like it's nice to be able to have a visual representation. Like in the Bible, they didn't necessarily have any images or any artists that made any art in the Bible, right? So, in a way, it's nice for artists to be able to kind of imagine what it looked like and for us to kind of get a picture of maybe what some scenes look like. So, at least in my case, I really like artwork and something that I can see, and yeah, I just feel like it's nice to have that.
Okay, so for you it's an enhancement.
Yeah.
The artwork enhances what you're reading.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I think images is like a global like language, because like let's say if you are in a Chinese country and you don't know what a word they are saying, then if you have pictures of like what they are speaking about, then you'll be able to like learn and know what they are saying at least, instead of like listening to the words. And it like images conveys like emotions, you know, like when you see certain image of like the cross where Jesus is like bowing there, you're like he did this for me, you know, like it really touched your heart. And you want to see the next one, like what happened next, so it really conveys emotions for you.
Okay, good point. So one, it can be understood across languages, and two, it conveys emotions in a powerful way. Okay, I'm making notes on points. You might want to make notes on points as well.
So I think images can be good and bad. So I think for like people who aren't as visual, it could be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also that, well, I think if you're gonna worship the image, I don't think that's good because it's like kind of replacing God. But I think an image, I know for me personally, it's like it's easier to see an image and picture what he's like than just making up my own perceptions of him.
Okay, so you like to have an image rather than just imagining it yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think we can come back to that issue of worshiping images in our discussion. Good. Charis.
Images can be helpful. I mean, like, obviously we have Jesus right there. And it can help us, like, every day just be able to, like, you see it and, like, oh, yeah. And, like, help us remember that we don't, like, forget that he is there. But I guess back in, what was it, the 7th century, 8th century? Like, they had statues and images, like, everywhere in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, like, venerating them. Which is, I think, taking it too far. Like, obviously you can have pictures of Christ in the church, you can have a cross, but, I don't know, they just, like, took it too far. It's just to, like, help us remember and be able to, for those who need more of the visual representation, to have a picture in their head, but it's not to actually use to help worship the actual person. It would be just to, like, remember.
Okay. So actually, you added something different. So it's not the same as what everyone said. You've added something unique and valuable. That there's kind of a line with images that you have to be careful not to cross. That's one thing I heard you say. And then also that images are particularly good for memory and helping us remember. Okay, so those are good new points. It's Chen, right?
I would agree with Charis that veneration in the sense of what the Catholic Church was doing with their images at the time is a little too far. I think images are very important religiously, but they should be used as a means of communication, like has already been stated. For example, an image that carries a message, like for example the one that's in the music building with the girl sitting on the bench, and then in the trees you kind of see like the outline of Jesus' face. That I think is a very appropriate use of images, where it shows a clear message about God always being there, close to us, watching over us. But we should not be. We shouldn't be worshiping such images, but even the veneration can be a little bit too far in some cases, I think. We definitely shouldn't have disrespect for them, though. Like, we still have to respect them in the same way we respect symbols of other things, like the flag for our country, like we previously talked about. So it's still important to respect them, but not necessarily such, like, we don't need to elevate them to such a high, like, they're not so important that we need to be doing anything special for them.
Okay.
I guess that's kind of
Yeah,
easy.
I'm just speaking back a main point that I understood. For you, the image is very efficient at conveying a message.
Yes.
But what's important is the message, not the image itself.
Yes.
And so you want to be careful not to elevate the image, but accept the message. Is that your point?
That's correct.
That's good. Angelo.
So I've been agreeing with Chandler and Shiraz for the most part. Like, it's good to have images because some people aren't that much. Their imagination isn't. I don't know. It's just they can't really see what they're reading, so it's good to have like a picture that helps them along with the imagination process. But, yeah, especially for kids. But like for me, I don't really like seeing pictures because I already have this preconceived concept of what the scene looks like, what the people are like, and all that in the Bible. And then when they throw in like a picture, it like kind of destroys the excitement. Like I'm already like developing it and all that, and then seeing something that like most always like contradicts what I've already like imagined, it just kind of lets it down.
Okay, so you brought in a new point and you're agreeing with her. And what I'm hearing you say is that when you read, you create your own images and you enjoy doing that, and that's part of your reading experience. And when someone else comes in and kind of imposes an image on you, that's disturbing. All right. Good point. And next, is it Juliet?
Yes. So one thing that I have to say that is just so okay. I was on Pinterest and there's a site called Tumblr. Okay, there's a site called Tumblr, and it's for like a lot of different people on it. But then they were talking about one person like in the South how Christian moms have like a whole wall of crosses, with all different pretty designs and curls and all these things and flowers all around it. Who here in this like chat has that on their wall? And two people said, "Oh, I do," and the other person said, "Oh, I do. I have this wall of crosses, all over the house." And they said, "Oh, that's so cute. You know, you guys should date." And then the people were like, "Oh, sorry, we're both gay." And it was like funny, you know. And I read it, and I was like, "Huh." But that brought up the question. It's like this symbol, this thing, this cross, which means so much to Christians everywhere, which meant, you know, everything to God, which is like the whole reason that we believe in the gospel has become this mundane sort of just arbitrary image in people's houses, and people are not using it to enhance their relationship with Christ. It's just something that's there. So for me, when I see those crosses everywhere, and when I see, like, you know, this image that is so precious and is so personal, and, you know, just all pink and with doilies and like all this stuff, it really cheapens the experience of the cross. And then secondly, what Angela was saying about having an idea of, like, when you read and, like, and then you think of something, like, even in ordinary books, like, if I read something and then I go online and there's fan art and it's like, no, this isn't. Or when they make a movie out of a book and it's like, this is not what those characters look like, you know? So, but my problem is, from a young age, I had seen pictures of Jesus, you know? I'd seen this guy with, like, long brown hair, and he never smiled. Like, it took me so long to just think about what Jesus would look like that apart from these images. So I couldn't even, like, craft for myself an idea of who he is or what he looked like. And, like, God always being this guy in the clouds who was always floating down, and he never smiled either, and he was always coming, you know, to kill all the bad people and take all the good people. And that image was, like, really just harmful for me because I couldn't relate to this God, you know? He was a person that never laughed, never smiled. I don't know. He was wearing robes for some reason still. Like, it didn't make sense for me. So yeah, that's my thing with images. But also, I mean, for things like this, and, you know, and understanding, like, the beasts in Revelation, and even that can sometimes get weird because, like, the images are not even what it really is, you know? Like,
Okay, I hear two main points I'm hearing, and I'm just giving you feedback on what we're hearing. The one you just last ended on is the fact that there can be errors in depictions, in images, and those errors could have grave consequences. And especially when we're talking about religious images. So there's a danger in images, especially in portraying something, and maybe I'm adding a little to yours now, but God is purposely unseen, right, in the Bible. He's no man has ever seen God at any time, all those kind of things. And then by depicting him, we're almost bound to be erroneous in some way in that depiction, despite best efforts or even high artistic skill. So I get that point. Am I correct on that point? And then the second point I heard you say was that the pervasiveness of images, as you said, cheapens them. That sometimes I think Chandler was the one saying that message of the image is what's important, but even the message of the image can get lost when images become so pervasive, which was not an 8th century problem, but is a real issue today, right? Because never in the history of mankind have we ever had access to so many images so easily, so often, and in so many different forms. It's not just individual artwork, painters or sculptors. It's, you know, your phone, your computer, artwork from all over the world. It's in your classroom. You almost can't get away from it. You go to the gas station and you're pumping gas and images are popping up at you because they have a screen. Right? There are screens everywhere. So your point about the ubiquity of images and how that could affect the strength of their message. That's what I heard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We still have 2 more people. Karen.
So I've thought about this I thought I had thought about this a lot until I heard what she said, but because for a while I've wanted to make a series of pictures moving very fast about the Great Controversy. And it was, I kind of run into this problem before of, how do we make it to where things I don't impose upon. And I think that's something that you can't get away from. Because you can't just make an anonymous character in a movie. So that's a problem that you can't get away from imposing. So I've gone back and forth on making the movie or even not, because of that problem. And I think one of the main points that's been brought out is how some people like it where they don't have to imagine it themselves. But if you imagine it yourself, it becomes more personal. If you have, case in point, example here, when my dad was going through nursing school, Mom made a bunch of flashcards for him. And he never used them because he didn't make them. And they're not as meaningful. You don't get them. If you make your own position and images and imagine it yourself, then it's yours. And I think that's a key point. On the other hand, though, images are very, very, very effective at communicating complex, profound messages. And I'm doing a pen process paper on movies. And one of the main points that's been brought up is that movies can drive social change. And I think that's something that, yes, it is true that for thousands of years people never had this new form, this new medium, which I find kind of strange that we have it now and we take it so much for granted, when for so long it never existed and the world used to be perfect without it, which kind of makes me wonder, like, what's the point? What is the purpose of a movie? And of course, it can drive social change. So I'm not denying that maybe it has some purposes, but its origins are kind of strange. Images, it's like this depiction of reality that's not reality. And I don't want to be like super, like, depressing about this whole thing. I know it's like strange line of thought, but I think sometimes we stop living reality because we live in other people's realities too much. And that's a huge problem today.
Okay, wow. Okay, I'm not sure I'm going to encapsulate everything that you've said, but I'm going to try a little bit. One thing I heard to begin with, you talked about the fact that it's impossible not to impose on someone's imagination. So perhaps the creators of images need to be aware of that and a little bit careful. Or not a little bit, but maybe just careful. And that it's different to imagine something yourself versus have someone else imagine it for you. Now, I think previously someone talked about that can be helpful for people to give them an image, stimulate their own imagination. But on the other hand, you're sort of balancing that out with, if it doesn't come from you, it's not as personal, and so it may not be as meaningful. Then you talked about how effective images are for communicating complex thoughts and deep thoughts, and that is a power that can be used for change. And I'm assuming, of course, it could be used for positive change or not, but we would be interested in how it could be used for positive change and drive social change. And then you delved into a little bit of a topic that may be a can of worms, but on the other hand, it's a good point, because when people do things like screen time, how much time do young people spend looking at a screen
too much.
And how many images do they see in the course of a day? And it becomes their reality to a point that if they are deprived of those images for even a short period of time, they feel so uncomfortable. Now, there are students who come to this school and deprived of their phones and TV and, and constant computer, they feel uncomfortable because they don't have constant access. And it may not only be images on that, but anyway, I do believe it's true we can get into another reality, the virtual world, right? And we talk about virtual world. It's a word that you can picture, but it's not really there. Now you can take a virtual tour of everything. I could get up on Google Earth a virtual map of ancient Rome, and we could walk through the streets.
And thankfully that's based on reality very closely. But then
as much as they can, yeah.
But then with other things, they can totally create a new world that doesn't even exist.
That's right.
And it becomes a reality.
That's right. So there's can be good and bad to it, but that's a good point. Do images, while on one hand they're very good at conveying a message, can they also draw us into an unreal world? And what are the consequences of living regularly in an unreal world? What consequences does that have on the real world? Good, that's almost an extra question that we brought up. Okay, before we open it up, we're going to hear from Nathaniel.
So I think all y'all basically stole all my points. I had to change what I was going to say about 4 terms.
I just want to tell you, restating someone's points in your own words is perfectly acceptable. I find that most time when people do that, they add something. Like Cheris, who said she didn't have anything new, she actually added some major new things. So you probably will too, even if it's a repeat.
So I guess based on question 2 about the advantages and disadvantages of having images for conveying a message, I think it was what Angela brought up, was the fact in that when you read books, as per se the Bible, that wasn't written with images, your imagination has a freer range to kind of piece together, to put together what a possibility of what could have happened, and etc. So that's one advantage of not having images. Now, one advantage of having images is, for example, when something has happened, a major thing happened. Right now I can think about the trip to the moon back in 1969, when they went to the moon. Imagine if they never took cameras when they went to the moon. They went to the moon, they did their thing, they came back and they had no pictures, they had no images to prove it. All they had was for them to tell you what it was like, and you had to believe them. Now, images can be proof for what the message you're trying to convey. Now, I do agree for some images that we often do use our imagination to create images, like for the things that happened in the Bible time. We weren't there, we didn't see what happened. All we know is maybe a little bit from what somebody wrote down, and maybe from a little bit what the Bible says. But other than that, from things back in ancient history, we really don't know, per se, what really happened. And so oftentimes we do use imaginations, but I think that images are useful when they're used correctly, but when they're used incorrectly, I think they can be extremely harmful, because then they can be misleading. And one example I can think is oftentimes artists try to depict what heaven is going to look like. They make this, or at least they try to make this really beautiful scene. I think oftentimes Adventists today have a really watered down idea of what heaven's going to be like. And that is one extreme disadvantage of having images. Oftentimes you get a really watered down picture of what something that is to come is going to be like. Now, that you could possibly say that would be a good thing, because then we're in for even greater surprise, but I personally don't think that that's a good thing, to have a watered down idea of a spiritual aspect of what heaven would be like.
Okay, good. So in your restatement of that idea about without images, the mind is freer to imagine, I heard you make an emphasis on the fact that that's an aspect of freedom. And if I were to look at the other side of that, that means that images could be a certain use of images could be a form of control.
Yes.
So we might have a little something going there. And then I also heard you talk about images as proof. This is an interesting point. You know, how often do people take selfies or whatever just to say, hey, I was here, you know, look at me. So we tend to use images as a proof of something. And then, of course, your last point here about the possible harm of under depicting or just inaccurate depictions, inaccurate images. And sometimes it's inaccurate simply because we really haven't been there. We really don't know. Right? I mean, even it's interesting that there's that Bible verse that says, you know, eye has not seen and ear has not heard. Right? So we haven't been able to perceive certain realities. So how can we depict them? That certain things would be beyond our ability or even the best artist's ability to depict. And so if we depicted something that's not possible to depict, what are we doing? You know, is that harmful? And I wonder if that's one of the reasons why God said not to make any image of himself. He did not ask for images of himself. He said, no, I cannot be seen, right? And he asks us not to do that. Now, Jesus revealed God to us. But was the purpose of Jesus to reveal what God physically looked like?
No.
No, we pretty much all know that wasn't the point. So what God wanted to reveal is something that is not visible. He wanted to reveal the character, right, of God. And a character is not something you can put in the image form. So maybe that leads us to the point that images are powerful, but they have a limit. And that's sort of your last point, that they have a limit, and when they try to go some beyond what they're able to do, they don't do it nearly justice, and they may even do it harm. So your point about I had a picture of Jesus and I had a hard time shaking that from my mind, can it be that when we even depicting, Jesus was a real person, so we have some chance of getting a reasonable depiction of him. But try to do God, you know, do we have any way to do that? What would happen? All right, you've all made some great points. Do you have any questions or further comments on any of the points that were brought up?
His last comment, I wanted to give another example of how you can depict something, but it may not really actually like through that image. It can go both ways, but for example, if you take a picture of a person, very often that picture does not show what that person even really looks like, let alone what they are like as a person. But then in some cases, if you take a picture of something, it can show it better than if you were to describe it, or even when you were there and experiencing it yourself. Sometimes the photo can even show it a little bit better. It can go both ways, but there are often times when it really doesn't show its true character through the image.
Okay, that's a good point. The images don't, and that in our time, not only is that true, but also we all know that images can be manipulated. We have such good, they can be manipulated. So even the images as proof isn't as strong as maybe it was in the past. Now, can we even be sure that the images we're seeing are true?
Yeah.
So that's just a little extra add on to yours. We're open now, so you are,
Okay.
and
so,
we can talk to each other. We can even maybe draw it and make a little more of a circle. We sort of started in the same position as yesterday's debate. Maybe push that table out and pull you guys in a little bit.
We only have a minute
We
left.
have a minute left to class.
We'll have a minute?
Yeah.
What a shame. All right. Boy, those talks took longer than I thought they would. Well, anyway, okay.
Okay, I agree with what Juliet said because I saw this thing that so this company was trying to convey a message about their competition, and then they put a picture of a baby, and then some people thought, are they helpless, young, and like really like ignorant and stuff, but obviously that message didn't go across the people, and then on the other hand, like so a thumbs up, is good. Like it's good in America, but for China, it can be offensive. That's what I was reading about that, and I think the person who is like drawing or making the image needs like perspectives. Like how a good teacher can explain one lesson in like 10 different ways. I think he's like the person who is doing the message, the drawing should be the same.